Well, the love that my family gave me, and then that love for the education as well and the educational background, that's that strength that kept me going no matter how life went. Because life can go left or right. I mean, it's not a straight course.
Welcome to Flip Your Script, the podcast about life's critical turning points and how people find the inspiration and motivation to move forward and rewrite their unique stories. Flip Your Script is produced by Media Minefield, a public relations firm passionate about the power of sharing stories. Specializing in earned and social media, Media Minefield helps clients take control of their unique story and message. The show is hosted by Christy Peel, founder and CEO of Media Minefield, who flipped her script from an Emmy-winning journalist to a successful entrepreneur and speaker.
To escape a war-torn country, today's guest dodged bullets and survived years of life in a refugee camp. She made it to America and rewrote her story. Dr. Maja Zelihic is a Fulbright Specialist, full professor and department chair at the Forbes School of Business and Technology at the University of Arizona Global Campus. She recently co-authored a book, The Power of Perception, and until March 2020, she was traveling the globe, speaking and doing research. Dr. Maja, welcome to the Flip Your Script podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So we were both on a panel, we were both being interviewed, and I didn't know your background. I just knew all the things that you're doing now, which is very impressive. But we both sort of had this weird connection, like we need to keep talking. And then the more I learned, I was really interested to get to this part of your story, which you talk about some, but not a lot. So tell me about your growing up, where you grew up and what that was like.
Sure. Well, I grew up in former Yugoslavia. It's actually right now the country is called Bosnia and Herzegovina. I was born and raised in Sarajevo. Sarajevo used to be known for the Winter Olympics. It's a very, very, very beautiful city. It's a historical city that has a rich heritage and rich history. So I grew up in Sarajevo up until the point of time when I was 18 years old. Not quite 18. So 17 and 10 months or something along those lines.
So you're growing up and it's peaceful or it's violent?
It's very beautiful. It's actually my childhood was very beautiful. Sometimes I like to say I'm not sure if my childhood was as beautiful as I remember, or whether a few things that came afterwards were as horrific as they were. But I grew up with parents and grandparents. I didn't have any siblings in an incredibly loving home. Everyone valued education quite a bit. There was a lot of love. And my grandfather was the biggest presence in my life, and he was the most important influence in my life. And he was my heart. So my parents and grandparents were quite supportive. I had a big circle of friends, a pretty good social life. I went to the oldest high school in the country that actually even had a Nobel Prize winners. So it was quite a prestigious education. Had lots of great friends, wonderful teachers, and pretty much life was excellent.
So odds are most of the people listening will have been born and raised in America in some fashion. And the kind of childhood you're describing sounds like a very privileged American childhood, because I think everyone puts it through their own perspective and experience. And when a lot of us hear some of the countries that you named and where you're from, we think war. So it's really, depending upon your age, if you're younger and you're in your 20s, you might think beautiful honeymoon spot. But if you're in your 40s, 50s, you're thinking war. So for you, it was exceptionally privileged up until a certain point. So what happened?
Up until the war, actually. So I grew up in a socialist country, but my country was very open. So we were never part of the Eastern Bloc. We were a very open country, so we could travel west. And we were a kind of a bipolar mixture between East and West. We like to say that we had the best of both worlds. So a lot of times people confuse former Yugoslavia with some of the Soviet republics or some of the other Eastern European countries. We actually as history had it, in 1948, we broke up with Russia, for the lack of better words. So we were pretty much a socialist country that was Western oriented, which not that many people know about that here. So it was a pretty good, it was still a socialist type of a state, but the one where you could still travel and you could still do a lot of different things that people were experiencing in the West. So in 1992, the war broke out.
And did the war break out in like one moment? Like, or was it a slow fade? We think this is coming, get prepared, or did it totally shatter your life very quickly?
There was a buildup. There was absolutely a buildup with a lot of things that were happening, a lot of things within our politics. And our president passed away in 1980. The country started breaking apart in 1991. So it was like 11 years in making, but keep in mind, those 11 years were the best years of my life. It wasn't as if I was watching TV and I was not in tune with politics much. I was enjoying the middle school, and then of course enjoying the high school and first love and teenager typical things. And for example, the weekend prior to the war breaking out, I was preparing for this play, and we had the final dry run, and we did terrific. So the best day of my school life was that last day in school, and we thought we're coming back Monday and we're going to present, because we had this big play that we were prepping for quite some time. I haven't seen any of them for approximately 20 years. So you're leaving your high school on Friday, and you never see those people until 20 years later, as we're coming as adults from different countries in the world. So I personally, my little universe was not aware of everything that was happening, and many of my generation was not aware, but of course our parents and grandparents were.
You're supposed to go back to school Monday. You think Monday is going to be normal.
Yes.
What happened that week for you?
The barricades have been erected across the city. The country started separating already in 91, with Slovenia and Croatia gaining independence. Afterwards, Bosnia gained independence. And then what had happened was without going into too much of the political discourse that I'd rather avoid, the shelling of the city started. The casualties started happening, and I literally already by that Sunday, we were seeing the fighting within our neighborhoods, and we were seeing people, young people, already as casualty of the army attacking the city. That was very, very traumatic because perceivably happened overnight, and perceivably happened kind of at the best point of my life. What had happened to me is that I was unprepared. My family was not prepared for, I don't know how any family can prepare for the world ending, for lack of better words, but I really felt that my family was in some sort of they were pretty delusional. They were very unprepared, and they were not expecting the war to happen. So we didn't necessarily have any sort of a backup plans. We didn't have our bags packed or anything along those lines. And ultimately, my parents had to move to another part of the city, and my dad had to move me from one part of the city to another. And one of the incidents that you were mentioning was that they were shooting at our car, and at that point of time, I was really afraid for my life. However, I would like to preface this by saying I saw the glimpse of war, for the lack of better words, because I stayed in the war just for a few first months. I would like to acknowledge all the people that stayed in that war for the duration of the war, people who lost so much more than I have. I would like to say that whatever I've experienced, I would like to preface this by saying that so many more people lost so much more.
And first, you lost your childhood to some degree. You lost your normalcy personally, and then your family gets split apart, and you were getting shot at. How do you go from the violence of the war to the refugee camp, and what happened to your family?
Well, my family didn't want to leave the city. Both of my parents and grandparents, for some people, it was something as basic as preserving their property that they worked for their entire lives. You do realize once the human life is threatened, the property doesn't mean much. However, you're still in that mindset of protecting your house by staying in your house. Ultimately, my family had to leave our house, and we ended up having to relocate to another part of the city. So the preservation of the property portion, we kind of lost that at the beginning of the war. And then there was a conversation being that I'm the only child, and they were just very fearful and very afraid of me staying in the city. And I was mad at them for quite some time, actually. I felt like they pushed me out. Of course, now that I have my own children, I totally can relate to what they were doing. So I actually started my journey, and I like to call it my journey west, where I went from one part of the country to another, and then ultimately was able to cross into I went into, through the Hungarian border into Austria. My ultimate goal was Germany. I actually had a German visa, but I never made it to Germany. I ran out of money. So I ended up staying in Austria for 3.5 years. I was so close to Germany, but the Red Cross placed me in a refugee camp, and the camp actually had some of my relatives already. They were not my parents or my grandparents, but it was my maternal grandmother's brother and his family. So that was kind of a natural fit for me to at least be in a semi-family unit, at least at first. But then I started my journey alone in that camp for quite some time. And that's when I started my refugee life, 93 through 96, 97 if you want to be technical, because I came to the United States as a refugee as well. So I was in a refugee status for 4 years.
And during that time, two questions. How was life there? What was that like to live like that? And second of all, did you know if your parents and grandparents were okay?
Not on a day-to-day basis. The phone lines were disconnected. So I ended up having to, we were getting in touch through the radio volunteers. I am not 100% aware as to how that technology even worked, but he would get a phone call, and on the other line, it was like a networks of these amateurs that were running these radios across Europe. So there were so many people that were helping us out. Many of them would not even understand our language, but they were realizing those were the people from Bosnia that were actually tuning in to hear their loved ones in another European country. So you cannot consider that a phone call, because it was just like you keep repeating the sentences. So you just kind of, and all you do is like, you just get a sign of life, especially several horrific massacres that happened in Sarajevo from the grenades and shelling of the city. After every single one of those, all you want is to hear the sign of life. My mom was wounded twice in the war. She was actually severely wounded. She barely pulled through the second time. Of course, they were hiding it from me for quite some time as well. And they were, all the possessions, we lost everything. But I don't even want to, like I said, I would be ashamed to even mention that, considering how much other people lost. But the material possessions, basically, that was gone very early on. The biggest issue for our family was my mom being severely wounded.
And teenagers in general are pretty selfish creatures. Teenagers in general think the whole world revolves around them. And that's sort of how your life was prior to the war. How did you find the mental strength and grit required to completely change your life and live in that refugee camp apart from your family for over 3 years?
Well, I was very alone. I was also alone by the nature of who I was. I was an ethnically mixed child. And being an ethnically mixed child in a refugee camp put me in some sort of an isolation category by its very nature. I was also an ethnically mixed child in the war, where several different ethnicities were at that point of time engaged in that horrific situation. So I felt lonely by the very nature of who I was. However, I found some incredible friends there. And I also, my group of teenagers, with other teenagers, we started going out once a week to the city, because we lived in this, it was an old hotel where we actually ended up living. And we would actually take a little train, and we would go to the city and go out. And so I had that immediate peer group. And also there were several older people in that camp that kind of took me under their wing and took care of me. I think it came as close to a family unit. It was a pretty dysfunctional family of 35 with lots of ups and downs and lots of drama. But in life, we tend to remember the best things. And I have some lifelong friends from that experience that I'm still in touch with. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to come. I'm very thankful that I was able to come. Like I said, my maternal side of the family, they were already placed there, and thanks to them and their efforts, I was able to land in that camp. I'm thankful to them.
So you get from this dysfunctional family unit of refugees where the highlight is getting to take a train into town once a week, and you're all alone feeling this loneliness. How do you get from there to America?
Well, when the war stopped, and it stopped thanks to the NATO intervention, we were given basically, many of us that were from the big cities were told that at that point of time we're supposed to go back home. I tried staying either in Austria or, to be frank, in Holland. So I've tried that. That didn't work out. They were looking for some factory workers in Austria, and I didn't pass that. I didn't pass that test because I always had issues with my eyes. So I felt my life ended because I didn't pass the test to work at a factory. Because I think I'd be a factory worker in Austria right now had I passed that test.
Wow. Well, thank goodness. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that, but look at what you've given to the world. So anyway.
I tell my students a lot of times that sometimes when you receive a huge rejection in life, that opens a tremendous opportunity for you. And I give them that example. I literally was crying because not only I didn't pass that test, I failed it so miserably. It was like we were supposed to take these precious gems out of a stone. I didn't even see the stones because they were so tiny. I was like, I didn't even see where the actual stone is. So this guy that was actually screening us, he was like, yeah.
Go over there. Doors that way, sister. Yeah.
This one can go. So I applied to immigrate to the United States. It is actually a very lengthy process. As you've noticed, as I was talking about Bosnia as well, I stay away from politics to the extent possible. And as a matter of fact, I do this globally, not just when it comes to here in the United States or Bosnia and stuff. But I would like to just say one thing that may be perceived slightly political. Refugee process is a very strict and very lengthy process. For one to be vetted as a refugee, to be admitted to the United States as a refugee, at times they went through 2 years of different type of interviews, different type of documentation verifications, background checking, and also health screenings. And I like to tease my friends, I was even screened for yellow fever. At that point of time, I never left Europe. I was like, what are the chances of me getting yellow fever? So happy to. So I was teasing some of my friends later on, my American friends, when I started working. I said, well, if you want to make sure you marry someone that definitely doesn't have anything, including yellow fever, you need to grab one of those refugees that just landed. So all jokes aside, it was a pretty lengthy process. I would say a year and a half to 2 years.
Of all the countries, why America?
Well, it was down to 3 or 4 places in the world where you can start fresh, leave your troubles behind, and embrace the country, the culture, become bicultural, and truly feel as if you are. I feel the United States is my country. Those few places were Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia. I think that's pretty much it. So it was between those 4 places, and United States. This is not gonna make me sound very smart. I was in love with American movies, so it's like between the 4, I was gonna pick United States. So I wish I can give you this profound answer. Oh, I was doing it because of the Constitution, no, I was doing it because I was really watching a lot of American movies. So that was my image of the United States. I wanted to come.
Hey, whatever works. I mean, you wouldn't be, many people say that they learn English by watching American TV, and that friends taught them English or whatever it might be. So
yeah. The funny thing is, I don't think we were truly dissecting American movies properly. For example, one of my favorite movies was An Officer and a Gentleman, and I wanted to be her so badly. But think about her life. Think about all the social issues that were brought up in that movie. She was working in a factory. The biggest happiness that she can encounter is to marry a Navy guy. I mean, I didn't see any of that. So,
You just wanted to be in a factory, Dr. Maja. That's what it was. You were jealous that she got the factory job and you didn't.
I think it was just like you see the glamour that is not really glamorous. You see what you want to see. It's the whole thing when we talked about perception. It's what you perceive it to be, you know.
Well, in the 90s, one of my favorite movies as a teenager was Pretty Woman. And
Yeah.
you think about, she was a working prostitute, which is a profession, but not one that many parents want their teenagers to aspire to. And I remember watching that with my parents, and we thought it was just such a great movie. But anyway, we went way off track, which is fine. So we'll get back. You get to America, and how do you mentally get from I couldn't get a job in a factory to I'd like to get my PhD and start doing global research? How does that happen?
Well, I started my university journey in Austria. I passed the German state exam, and I was actually going and taking university classes there. And the organization that was supporting us refugees, actually, they were supporting my educational efforts even there. However, I did not finish because once you get your paperwork that you're able to immigrate to the United States, it's not really recommended for you to call them and say, hey, can I postpone this by, so basically what you need to do, you need to get on a flight and you leave. So when I got here, I started working at the warehouse. As a matter of fact, we were placed by the Lutheran Social Services, and the Lutheran Church placed us in different jobs. So I started working at the warehouse. But from the get-go, I started saying to myself, well, first of all, I need to speak English at a much better level than I was speaking when I first got here. And then the second thing is I was really eager to continue my education. To my surprise, they did not recognize too many of my courses that I finished in Austria. I said to my surprise, because it was one of the oldest universities in Europe, so I was a little confused how that played out. I almost gave up, but I said to myself, you know what, let's just do one course at a time. And I was consistently working and going to school, and I was never able to be a full-time student without working. I always had to work. So that's kind of how I did that. Yeah.
When did it become clear to you that you wanted to get your master's and eventually your PhD?
When I started working in a financial industry, I worked for the Merrill Lynch Credit Corporation. I started doing we had a lot of private label clients, many famous financial institutions. I was working there on processing loans. I was working in the mortgage industry. And they had a pretty decent tuition reimbursement program. So I was going to get my master's. And then a friend of mine, she asked me to join her in a training lab one day. She needed some help. She was actually conducting training, teaching different classes how to do the job. And just something happened to me in that training lab. I all of a sudden formulated this idea of wanting to be in front of the audience, wanting to be lecturing. I don't know that I was necessarily saying I want to be an educator per se, because once you start having those goals, they're not always, only in the books they're clearly formulated. Only in the books they say, and then I said I was going to be, that's not how it played out. It was like this, I like to be in front of the audience. That was the first thought. Then I like to teach. I like when people understand what I'm teaching them and they can apply it. I think I like education. I think I like to educate. So it was kind of gradual. So from corporate training, I got my PhD while still in the financial industry. And then I ultimately started teaching part-time. And then finally in 2013, I went into the world of academia, left the financial industry. I was quite reluctant. I was very scared. And I had a lot of experience in the financial industry, which helps me now with doing, all these business courses and doing a lot of things pertaining to business. Because I'm a true practitioner. I'm not necessarily what one would say just in the world of academia.
What you said, I think, is so important because a lot of people, I think, can connect to it, is that you said you didn't have your clear path early. You took one course at a time, one decision at a time. It was a slow revealing of where you would eventually end up. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people, perhaps it's those American movies where we think, oh, I should know at 18 or at 20 that here's my end path and this is the exact way to get there. And very few people have a straight path from the teenage years to their ultimate profession. It's a lot more jagged than I think a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, and it's also going back to my childhood. I think the foundation that I had, I always say the high school I went to, I cannot even express what type of quality that was. Like I said, the high school that produced Nobel Prize winners. I mean, we were, and also in my own, when I was a little girl, and I might have shared this with you when we were chatting the other day. So just for the benefit of your audience members, I would wake up in the morning. My parents would be already gone to work. My grandma would feed me breakfast. My grandfather would play a party of chess with me. And after a party of chess, we would go with one topic for 2 hours: history, philosophy, politics, geography. We did this Monday through Friday. I thought that was normal. Later on, I found out that's not really what every single girl does with her grandfather. And he would ask me questions. He would ask me political questions at 5 years old that I think were way above that age range. And he would ask me about history. He would ask me about geography. And I was always a global citizen, if that makes any sense, considering at that point of time, I was not well traveled at all. But he was teaching me to be a global citizen, which will come in handy later on with my research projects, research ventures, being a Fulbright Specialist, being a true citizen of the world with everything that I do globally when the world is open, not now. But
do you do that with your children?
Well, the thing is, the timing is everything. I am trying to do a lot of it, but I do not have the kind of time that my grandfather had. So I'm going to use this as an ultimate excuse, because at that point of time, he was already retired. So after breakfast, it was perfectly normal for him. Now kids at 5, they're in kindergarten, correct? Well, our schools would be starting at like 6 or 7, or otherwise you would go to like daycare kind of a setting. So I think he was the one giving me, but that was way above the kindergarten level. So discussing women leaders. I would do a presentation about different women leaders. At that point of time, there was an Indian Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. So I was doing a presentation about Indira Gandhi in front of him. I was just 5, 6 years old. So those are the type of things that I remember growing up. I loved those lessons. They were not a chore for me. And afterwards, we would go to the park and we would do all the kid stuff. So it wasn't like we're only talking 2 hours, but it would always start with a party of chess. And then it would go into the actual lesson. So that was the foundation that set me up on the course. Well, the love that my family gave me, and then that love for the education as well, and the educational background, that's that strength that kept me going no matter how life went at some point of time, because life can go left or right. I mean, it's not a straight course.
What else is so awesome about what your grandfather did for you is just by asking you difficult questions and asking you to research things that other 5-year-olds probably weren't. He was sending you a message that you were smart enough and you were worthy and you were capable. And while he may or may not have used those words, that's a pretty powerful thing to plant inside a little person.
Yeah, he was really big on, he was ahead of his time. I don't think he would ever define this in these terms, because those are not the terms we use. I think he was really crucial for the female empowerment, because he kept telling me that I need to be independent. I need to have my own money. And he kept saying to me, you can do anything you want to do. And he was not using the phrases that we know nowadays, but he was ahead of his time for sure, because it was still a patriarchal setting at that point of time. But he was just, he really believed in me and my capabilities. That helped.
I love that seed that was planted was able to fuel you when you really needed it. So you come here, you eventually meet someone, you have children, you go through I hate to say typical American experience because that isn't really a thing, but you decide where your career is going. How did you decide to do the research that you do and the specific area that you do the research? Tell us about that.
It all kind of evolved. It was really first I started doing just a part-time teaching. Then I started doing a lot of research papers and research articles, different topics, conflict negotiation. Biculturalism was of interest to me because we have around 20,000 Bosnian Americans here in Jacksonville, Florida. And I was really fascinated with the concept how some people become bicultural and the others really don't. And also what can happen as far as which variables impact one's ability to become bicultural, correlating the concept of being bicultural to a success in a society, in a corporate world. So I was doing different research ventures, but then I started discovering doing a different e-learning implementation in the developing world. I discovered a true love for doing research in the developing world, field research in particular. I like to say, I don't like to do that. Of course, you can now, you can go on online library, you can write about anything, but I like to spend time somewhere where I'm going to eventually research that region. So I did research in Haiti, in Cuba, in Mexico, in Zambia. I did some research in the Middle East, Europe, of course. So I like to spend time in a particular setting. And my area of expertise is doing research in the small business arena in the developing countries. I like to study obstacle variables. So how can businesses thrive, small businesses thrive, despite all the obstacles that particular business is facing? Earthquake and hurricane in Haiti, corruption in Mexico, different areas that are crime-ridden, Cuba with its still communist system, some of the concerns and issues that the Southern African region is facing, the leftovers of the colonial period. So those are completely different issues, but ultimately have these businesses that are thriving. Those are the research ventures that I spent the last few years on, and the Fulbright research was done in Zambia in particular.
And then you do the perception, the book you wrote about perception. What kinds of things did that teach you that we need to know about?
Well, my co-author and I, Dr. Diane Hamilton, we did a book on perception we did research for around 2 years. The book just came out in December of 2020. We were trying to figure out what can we do to improve perception in a global corporate setting on the path of becoming global leaders, and how's perception correlated to the concept of success in global leadership. So we were studying different variables that impact our perception in personal, but primarily professional life, such as cultural upbringing, life experiences, gender, curiosity quotient, cultural quotient, emotional intelligence, regular intelligence, all these different things. So we were doing a lot of research pertaining to that. And think about when we were talking about my journey versus when we were chatting your journey or journey of my co-author. Our perceptions are formed based on these different journeys, different cultural backgrounds, and different things that we encountered in life. So we created not just the book, we created the training and the index, and we were working with different companies to get better in touch and get better understanding of their employees' perception, because that is correlated with their motivation and ultimate effectiveness, not just leadership effectiveness, but sustainability and effectiveness of business.
We also talked about how the last year has changed networking.
Yes.
And can you share with the listeners how your life is very different professionally from now than it was, 18 months ago, a year ago, and the benefits that you found? Because I know there are so many things that were taken, but you also have this ability that I'm very impressed with to see all the things that were gained. So let's talk about some of the things that you personally learned to appreciate in the midst of things being taken.
Well, what happened is at first, like everyone else, I had that moment of, what are we doing now? I can't travel because I was a purpose-driven traveler. I would have a conference or I would have a research venture, and then I would squeeze in 2 days here or 3 days here. I understand there's still some places where you can go and spend a few days, but that is not the kind of traveler I was. I was the one that would actually do something. No one's doing field research right this second, other than medical community, of course. No one's doing all these different conferences, these leadership retreats, and all these things that I was doing. However, I was able to attend many more conferences. Those were virtual conferences. I was able to be on many more panels. I was able to interview many more amazing people. I was able to be interviewed by many amazing people. And I met some people that were not in my immediate circle. Even though my circle was very wide, as was yours, but even within that wide spectrum of our circles, we all of a sudden met. For example, the way you and I met, we were on this terrific panel of 4 great people. But I don't see a scenario where there will be a particular conference, old school conference, or a particular meeting where the 4 of us from 4 completely different industries, different interests would be together on the same panel. Well, this virtual setting is enabling us to make these connections. I'm part of this group that was created by the gentleman from Australia, Equity at Work. All of a sudden, I'm meeting this lady from the UK just the other day. I'm having therapy, I'm calling it group therapy, with my friends from Australia. We have more time to connect with some folks that maybe because as busy as our lives were, we wouldn't be able to. I just want to be very blunt. I would still have it other way. I would still like to go back in time, if we can jump in a time machine, for this pandemic never to happen, and all this loss of life and these horrific issues that we encountered. However, we made the best out of what we were given.
And we've talked about, wouldn't it be wonderful if the best of before and the best of after joined into the future, so that we could, because to me, that's where the most incredible opportunities are ahead of us, is that we can do the traveling, but we also can make these kind of connections and then have the courage that I think we've all had in the last year to say, hey, we just were on a panel. You want to keep talking? Sure, I've got time. I'm not going anywhere. Let's chat and see what other kind of connections we can have. Because I agree with you, our paths wouldn't have crossed unless we were maybe in a sky club or an airplane sitting next to each other, but we probably would have had our laptops out. And because we were on this panel, we had the opportunity to talk afterwards. And then we talked again, and we're talking now, and we already have something on the calendar in October, and I'm sure we'll talk between. And that's a benefit in this middle of something that all of us wish we could have avoided.
Yes. And I think we should do the mixture of pre-COVID, post-COVID, during COVID, the best of these 3 periods, because we shouldn't go back to staying within our own circles. We should expand on all these beautiful people and beautiful engagements we had. But at the same point of time, we shouldn't deprive ourselves of face-to-face experiences. And I'm really looking forward to I said I'm not going to, usually I check the quality of the conference, who are the speakers. I said the very first one, I'm gone. I'm there. I don't care. If they have like 3 speakers, I'll be in the audience, 3 members of the audience. So we're all eager to go back to, we talked about the concept of having a cup of coffee with a friend. And yes, you can have it through Zoom, but there's still something that human experience. But hopefully we learned a lot, and hopefully all these cross-industry engagements that we made, we can capitalize on those and create these networks and these connections, and get into habit of not being in our little worlds, and consistently expand the way we were doing in the last year. I would not be able physically. 2020, and I'm ashamed to say this, we had this discussion, was professionally very good for me. But like I said, I'm really ashamed to say this, because this was a year of pain and suffering. But I would not be physically able to attend all the conferences I have. I probably wouldn't have time. Diane Hamilton and I, we would not have finished our book. We would probably need another year worth of research. So there were certain things that we were able to do that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do, because we had a little bit more time, because we didn't have those things that we love to do, such as go somewhere,
So as you raise your children and you think about all the things that made you who you are and all the experiences, the global travel, going back to the education, going back to one course, going back to making the journey to America, to before that, to playing chess with your grandfather, what things do you want to instill in them without them having to endure the pain?
Well, The first generation immigrants, and by no means am I comparing experiences that we had with the Holocaust survivors. But if you hear me for 2 seconds, I will tell you where I'm heading with this chain of thought. They were saying that Holocaust survivors were not able to sufficiently properly share with their children what they've experienced. They were able to do that with their grandchildren. So it's almost like you have one generation that was completely skipped as far as sharing the experiences. My children know some things, but I think that my children know a lot of things on a surface level. And even as I was talking to you at the beginning of this conversation, you've noticed that I'm very elaborate and very comfortable if we talk about the period prior to the war and the period right after the war. But as we were talking about the period during the war and everything that was happening during the refugee years, I was like, oh, let's take this little plane and just skip through that. I do that intentionally, and that's a coping mechanism. So with my children, they don't really know a lot. Yes, I do those regular. When I was young, I went to school barefoot through snow that all parents do, but I do that at the surface level like any regular American parent. But I'm not really bringing them to the story per se. I feel like maybe by the time I have my grandchildren, and my son is 22, so that's not that far away, I feel like I would maybe be able to share that a little bit better. So it's almost like you skip one generation. However, one thing that I give my children, I hope that I gave them the same amount of this enormous love that I was given, because that love will give you strength no matter the circumstances.
And an unconditional love is the kind of love that you're describing, is that it's the love that is there whether you decide to become a philosopher or take the factory job or stay single or have children, or it's not a love that is attached to an if. I will love you if. It's I will love you and.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. And also that they're always supported. I told them multiple times, even when you graduate and go and have your own families, if things don't work out, you always have a way back. For me, that is very important, having that way back, making sure that you know your family's home is your family home no matter what. And I also said I will always be your biggest cheerleader. I still actually reserve the right to give advice. Yesterday, we had a big argument pertaining to that. Don't give me advice. No, I will give you advice. Absolutely, I'm supporting your choices, but I'm still going to be the one giving you, how about these 3 options?
Because you've experienced more.
Yes. So those are the type of things. And, my daughter's now 15 years old. And, once the rolling of the eyes stops, sometimes she does listen to me. But I do realize now that my son is older, that is a very passing phase. And they really go back to fully understanding everything you're telling them. They just have to do this period between 13 and I think 17, where they have to act like they're not accepting anything you say because you're not cool. But anyways, it was funny. Just the other day, I was telling her, I said, hey, I heard that some people are promoting books on TikTok. Why don't you promote me on TikTok a little bit? And she's like, oh my God, we will never do that. Please don't do that. I said, why? That would be awesome. You and I said, you said you have all these followers. So
that's fantastic.
that was a no from her. So
hard pass, Mom. Hard pass.
Yeah. So yes, I think it's unconditional love is all that matters. And also in my case, I always tell them the importance of education. I am not running the household as a dictator, except one thing. I said, absolutely, you have the choice which university you want to go to. You do not have a choice not to go to the university. So that's one thing that I said, you don't have an option. Pick any degree. You want to study Greek philosophy? I will support you. We're going to figure out where you're going to work afterwards, but I'll support you. But I said, please get a degree, and then later on, you can do 20 other different things, That's what I know to tell them. Were there successful people that did an unconventional path? Absolutely.
But for you, education changed your life dramatically.
Yes. So it's and that's what I tell them, because it's funny when you talk to your kids, like what their goals are. And I think my son is just now really realizing what he wants to be. And it's just happening in the last year or so. So that's perfectly fine. You don't have to. And he may change his mind 20 times. It's okay. Just get that goal. I tell my students, find your passion. And it's not a cliche. Be passionate about something. I've discovered my passion in the developing world when we were doing e-learning implementation, because I realized that online education was changing the landscape in these countries. And it was giving, for the first time ever, a lot of young adults and children from the villages, they were all of a sudden able to pursue higher education. I had interesting stories in certain countries where, especially young girls, they had two choices, go to school or marry, but they didn't have enough funds to live in a city where they had a big university. Well, with online education, now they can attend university. So when I realized that I was very small scale within my little area, changing the world, I tell my students, find that little area where you can make just a little bit of a difference. And that's important. And don't think big picture. Not all of us can save. Just make a difference within your little area.
Fantastic place to get to the last question, which is there a quote or a lyric or something that has helped you as you've motivated yourself to really accomplish incredible things in difficult circumstances?
It's actually a very simple quote. It is, wherever you go, go with all of your heart. So that is my quote. So wherever you go, go with all your heart. I do that all the time. Every single new experience, a new person I meet, a new thing I learn, a new book I read, a new podcast I listen to, I go with all my heart. And I'm trying to learn and embrace and give value, hopefully, but also get some value in return and have that beautiful human experience.
I enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed the other conversations I've had with you. I know we're going to keep talking, and I hope someday we can do the hybrid and bring the online conversations we've had in person, and we can actually have that dinner that we've talked about a couple of times. So I look forward to the next conversation. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So some of the things that I heard Dr. Maja talk about that have resonated with me is that it's just the one step. Take the next right step. You don't have to have the whole big picture figured out. I love when she talked about huge rejection can lead to incredible opportunity. And ultimately, how much power is there in this? Love no matter what. My hope is Dr. Maja's story empowers you to believe you're capable of more than you think, to discover motivation, to uncover inspiration, and to find the strength to turn the page.
Thank you for listening to Flip Your Script, hosted by Christy Peel and produced by Media Minefield. If you like our message, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out flipyourscriptpodcast.com for pictures, resources mentioned in the show, and information about our other great episodes.